In an age where the elite of the British Empire were mapping the globe for gold and territory, a penniless shoemaker in a small English village was mapping it for something else entirely. While he hammered leather at his cobbler's bench, William Carey surrounded himself with homemade charts of the world and grammar books of ancient languages. He was possessed by a vision that his contemporaries dismissed as a fool's errand. He didn't just want to see the world, he wanted to transform it. This consecrated cobbler would eventually defy the world's most powerful corporation, cross an ocean against all odds, and ignite a movement that would bridge the gap between the West and the East. William Carey was not a product of academia or echelons of power. He was a bridge between a dormant Protestantism and a vibrant global faith. He emerged during a period of evangelical lethargy, dismantling apathy through a rigorous synthesis of biblical mandate and empirical data. His life was defined by a relentless plodding, a steady perseverance that saw him translate the Bible into dozens of languages and fight for social justice. By the time of his death, Carey had not only reshaped the missionary landscape, but had left an indelible mark on Indian culture and linguistics, proving that a single persistent life could indeed change the course of history. William Carey was born in 1761 in the unassuming village of Pollersbury, Northamptonshire. Growing up in a working-class environment, his formal education was limited to the local village school, which provided only the most rudimentary foundations of literacy. However, Carey's intellectual trajectory was never confined by his geography. He possessed an innate, voracious curiosity that turned his rural surroundings into a laboratory of learning. While he eventually learned the unglamorous trade of shoemaking, a necessity of his station, his mind was elsewhere. He spent his hours at the cobbler's bench, surrounded by books, effectively turning a workspace into a makeshift university. This period of his life was foundational in forging a character of extreme self-sufficiency and discipline. The manual labor of his youth did not stifle his intellect. Rather, it provided the plodding stamina that would later allow him to survive decades of hardship in the Bengal jungle. The turning point in Carey's life occurred at the age of 17. Through the persistent witness of a fellow apprentice, John Warr, Carey underwent a profound religious conversion in 1779. He described this experience as an exchange of his wretched self-righteousness for the righteousness of Christ, a shift that fundamentally reoriented his purpose. As a new Christian, Carey's struggle with the assurance of his faith drove him to a deep, systematic study of the Bible. He resolved to become a man of the book, but his pursuit of Scripture was inseparable from his passion for language. Without a formal tutor, he mastered biblical Hebrew and Greek, realizing early on that the key to understanding and communicating truth lay in the mastery of the original tongues. Parallel to his theological studies, Carey remained captivated by the secular exploration of his day. He devoured the journals of Captain James Cook, whose accounts of the South Pacific tribes provided more than just geographical data. For Carey, these journals acted as a window into the sin and misery of those living without the gospel. It was here that his burgeoning theology met a tangible global reality, sparking a vision that few of his contemporaries could grasp. By 1785, Carey was pastoring a small Baptist church in Moulton, England. His ministry was marked by a peculiar habit. While he preached and cared for his flock, he was also compiling exhaustive statistics on the world's population, religions, and geographies. He constructed a large map of the world, which he hung in his workshop. It was said that this atlas became his other Bible, and the mere sight of the unreached nations often moved him to tears. He found spiritual kinship in the biographies of earlier missionaries like John Eliot and David Brainerd, who had labored among Native Americans. Their lives provided a template for the sacrificial service he began to crave. By the time he was called to pastor in Leicester in 1789, Carey's private meditations had matured into a public conviction. He was no longer just a local pastor. He was a man possessed by a vision for the entire world, ready to challenge the status quo of the English church. By 1792, Carey's private convictions had been distilled into a potent manifesto. He realized that the primary obstacle to global outreach was not geographical or financial, but theological. The prevailing hyper-Calvinism of the era had inadvertently turned divine sovereignty into an excuse for human inaction. To dismantle this, Carey authored An Enquiry into the Obligation of Christians to Use Means for the Conversion of the Heathens. This work was revolutionary. It was the first systematic theology of missions ever published. Carey argued that the Great Commission was not a limited command for the apostles, but a perpetual obligation for the modern church. He balanced a deep biblical exposition of Matthew 28 with a data-driven survey of the world's religions. By framing the task as a use of means, Carey argued that God's will is accomplished through human agency, planning, funding, and sending. This shift moved missions from the realm of the miraculous to the realm of the mandatory. In May 1792, Carey addressed Baptist pastors in Nottingham. The message, dubbed the Deathless Sermon, was a thunderclap in a silent room. Drawing from Isaiah 54, he exhorted them to enlarge the place of your tent. It was here that he coined the immortal motto, "Expect great things from God, attempt great things for God." This was more than a catchy phrase, it was a blueprint for faith. The sermon struck a chord of holy dissatisfaction, creating an emotional and spiritual urgency that could no longer be satisfied by mere prayer or debate. The momentum culminated in October 1792 with the formation of the Particular Baptist Society, later the BMS. This marked a structural turning point. Carey recognized that only an organized society could provide sustained support. The society's humble start, launching with just over £13, invited mockery from skeptics who viewed the venture as a fool's errand. However, this voluntary society allowed ordinary Christians to bypass bureaucracies and directly participate in global efforts through their giving and prayers. Carey's decision to lead by example was the final catalyst. In 1793, he resigned his pastorate and prepared to move his family to India, signaling that the means included his own life. He inspired a wave of institutional imitation. Carey effectively transitioned Christianity from a regional European faith into a self-consciously global religion, laying the foundation for the great century of missions. The transition to India was brutal. The British East India Company, prioritizing commercial stability, was fiercely hostile to missionary activity, fearing it would disrupt trade. Carey was denied a legal license, forced off his original ship, the Earl of Oxford, before finally securing passage on a Danish vessel, the Kron Prinsessa Maria. Arriving in 1793, the hardships intensified. The family's meager possessions were lost on the Hooghly River, leaving them destitute in a foreign land. Carey's wife Dorothy found the transition psychologically devastating. The subsequent death of their 5-year-old son Peter pushed her toward a tragic mental decline. To survive, Carey took a job as a manager at an indigo factory in Malda in 1794. This became a vital season of preparation, allowing him to immerse himself in Bengali language and culture. He spent 5 years practicing tent-making, supporting himself while preaching, establishing schools, and refining his linguistic skills. By 1795, he was preaching in Bengali. Despite this labor, results were slow. It would be 7 years before Carey saw his first Hindu convert. This defined his plodding nature, a rigorous schedule of translation despite the lack of success. In 1800, Carey relocated to the Danish colony of Serampore, which offered a sanctuary where he could operate freely away from the hostile East India Company. This move coincided with the arrival of Joshua Marshman and William Ward. Together, they formed the Serampore Trio, combining linguistic genius, educational expertise, and printing skills. In December 1800, the mission celebrated a landmark success, the baptism of Krishna Pal, the first Hindu convert. This event proved that the means Carey had advocated for years were finally yielding a harvest in the soil of Bengal. Carey's most enduring legacy is arguably his work as a pioneer of vernacular translation. His approach was rooted in the Reformation conviction of sola scriptura, the belief that the Word of God must be accessible to people in their own language to effect true spiritual transformation. He did not view translation as a solo endeavor. Instead, he collaborated deeply with Indian Pandits to ensure both accuracy and cultural resonance. This collaboration resulted in a staggering output. Carey and his associates translated the entire Bible into 6 major Indian languages: Bengali, Oriya, Sanskrit, Hindi, Marathi, and Assamese, and produced portions in an additional 29 languages. In total, the mission was responsible for translations into 48 different languages and dialects. His linguistic precision was so significant that he is often ranked alongside giants like Jerome, Luther, and Tyndale. The Marquis of Wellesley invited Carey to become a professor of Bengali at the newly founded College of Fort William in Calcutta. Though initially hesitant, he accepted after ensuring it would not compromise his missionary duties. He spent 30 years there, eventually teaching Sanskrit and Marathi. During this tenure, he systematized the chaotic linguistic landscape of India, authoring comprehensive grammars and massive dictionaries. Perhaps his greatest philological feat was elevating Bengali from a local dialect to a sophisticated literary language, a transformation similar to what Martin Luther achieved for German. To support this output, Carey introduced modern technology. He established the country's first organized printing operation, paper mill, and even brought in a steam engine to power the works. The strategy relied on the Serampore trio, Carey, Joshua Marshman, and William Ward. Their synergy created a holistic model: 126 schools with over 10,000 students and the founding of Serampore College in 1818. They launched India's first vernacular newspaper and organized the first medical mission and a savings bank to protect the poor from usury. Carey believed the gospel was a direct challenge to sinful social structures. His most famous victory was the 35-year campaign against sati, the burning of widows alive on funeral pyres. He used his influence to provide research and moral pressure. When it was abolished in 1829, many attributed the breakthrough to Carey. He was equally vigorous in opposing infanticide and caste discrimination. Carey's consecrated curiosity extended to the soil. An accomplished botanist and fellow of the Linnean Society, he founded the Agricultural and Horticultural Society of India in 1820. By documenting India's natural world, his work fostered a Bengali cultural renaissance. Unlike many colonial figures, his work was seen as supportive of indigenous culture rather than destructive to it. Carey's public triumphs were mirrored by a harrowing personal life. He described himself not as a genius, but as a plodder. This endurance was tested by the loss of 2 wives and a son. In 1812, a catastrophic fire at Serampore destroyed all of Carey's manuscripts, including a universal dictionary valued at 70,000 rupees. Rather than despair, Carey viewed the disaster as a providence, noting that the publicity from the fire actually attracted new support from Britain. His later years were clouded by a bitter split with the BMS in 1827 over mission control. Despite this, Carey remained in India for over 40 years without ever returning to England. He was completely dedicated to his adopted country, proving that the means of a single life, given fully, could bridge worlds. As William Carey entered his final years, his physical frame began to fail, but his mental and spiritual resolve remained undiminished. He had spent over 40 years on Indian soil without a single furlough to England, a testament to his absolute identification with his adopted home. By the time of his death in 1834, the landscape of global Christianity had been irrevocably altered. He died not as a wealthy prelate, but as he lived, a humble servant who requested that his tombstone bear only his name, the dates of his birth and death, and a single line from a hymn. The inscription described himself as a wretched, poor, and helpless worm, who on God's kind arms relied. Carey's influence is best measured by the sheer scale of the movement he ignited. Before Carey, Protestant missions were sporadic and lacked a cohesive strategy. By the mid-19th century, dozens of missionary societies had been formed based on the Serampore model. His emphasis on the use of means, the necessity of organization, fundraising, and strategic planning transformed missions into the central heartbeat of the global church. His legacy also redefined the role of the missionary. Carey championed the idea that a missionary must be more than a preacher. They must be a linguist, an educator, a social reformer, and a scientist. In India, Carey is remembered as much for his secular contributions as his religious ones. He is frequently cited as the father of modern Bengali prose. By standardizing the grammar and vocabulary of the language, he provided the linguistic infrastructure necessary for the later Bengal Renaissance, which produced figures like Rabindranath Tagore. His successful advocacy against sati and his work in establishing Serampore College laid the groundwork for modern Indian education and human rights. His botanical and agricultural research provided tangible economic benefits to the rural poor, proving that his concern was not abstract but deeply practical. The life of William Carey is a study in the power of consecrated persistence. He was a man who possessed no inherited privilege, no formal higher education, and no initial institutional backing. Yet, through what he called plodding, he managed to dismantle centuries of theological apathy and bridge the gap between two vastly different worlds. Carey's greatness did not lie in a lack of failure. His personal life was marked by tragedy and his early ministry by a lack of converts, but in his refusal to abandon the vision he had formed at a cobbler's bench. Today, the modern missionary movement stands as a sprawling global forest, but its roots remain firmly planted in the soil tilled by a self-taught shoemaker. William Carey did not just start a movement. He provided the blueprint for how faith, when married to rigorous intellect and social compassion, can reshape the course of history. The life of William Carey forces us to confront a challenging question. What are we currently shoehorning into the margins of our lives that actually deserves our center stage? Reflect on your own Great Commission. In a world divided by language, culture, and creed, are you merely observing the landscape, or are you actively using means to build bridges? Carey's legacy reminds us that you do not need a pedigree to initiate progress. You only need the courage to attempt great things and the stamina to keep plodding. Join a collective of restless minds, dedicated scholars, and faithful plodders. Subscribe to Theology today for immersive, in-depth explorations into the biographies and faithful triumphs of those who stood for the faith. Stay informed, stay inspired, attempt great things.